The year is 1953. New York City. The Statler Hotel, 13th floor. A window shatters in the dead of night, and a man's body plummets toward the pavement below. His name is Frank Olson, a brilliant biochemist, a family man, a scientist working on America's most classified projects. The police call it suicide. His family accepts the tragedy, though questions linger. But here's what they didn't know. 9 days before his death, Frank's boss invited him to a company retreat in rural Maryland. They gathered for drinks. Laughter filled the room. And then, without his knowledge, someone spiked Frank's glass with a powerful hallucinogenic drug. Within hours, his mind began to fracture. He became paranoid, erratic, convinced that people were trying to kill him. Days later, he was dead. Was it suicide? Or was Frank Olson silenced because he knew too much? Because Frank wasn't just any scientist. He was collateral damage in the most terrifying secret program in American history. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is Project MKUltra, a government-funded operation that spanned 2 decades, consumed millions of dollars, and destroyed countless lives in pursuit of a single goal: to master the human mind, to erase memories, to reprogram behavior, to turn people into puppets. The CIA wanted to create the perfect truth serum, the ultimate weapon of psychological warfare, and they didn't care who they had to break to get it. What you're about to hear is documented, declassified, and deeply disturbing. Because the monsters in this story weren't foreign agents or enemy spies. They were American scientists, operating on American soil, experimenting on American citizens. And for decades, nobody knew. To understand how this nightmare began, you have to understand the fear that gripped America in the early 1950s. The world had just survived one war, and now it was plunging headfirst into another. Not a war of bullets and bombs, but a war of shadows and secrets. The Cold War. The Soviet Union wasn't just an enemy, it was an existential threat. And then came Korea. American soldiers, captured by Chinese and North Korean forces, began appearing in propaganda films, confessing to war crimes they never committed, denouncing their own country with blank stares and robotic voices. Some refused to come home even when given the chance. The American public was horrified. Politicians demanded answers. And the CIA had only one explanation: brainwashing. The term itself was new, coined by a journalist to describe what seemed like science fiction made real. The enemy, they believed, had cracked the code of human consciousness. They could break a man's will, rewrite his loyalties, turn him into a weapon against his own people. Whether this was true or exaggerated didn't matter. The fear was real. And the CIA was terrified they were falling behind. Allen Dulles, the newly appointed director of Central Intelligence, was a man obsessed with staying ahead. He looked at those propaganda confessions and made a decision that would haunt America for generations. If the Soviets had mind control, then America needed it too. But they wouldn't just match the enemy. They would surpass them. In April 1953, Dulles signed off on a new program. Its code name, MKUltra. Its mission: to develop techniques for controlling human behavior through covert means. No method was off limits. No ethical boundary would stand in the way. But every dark operation needs someone willing to get their hands dirty. Enter Sidney Gottlieb. If you were casting a movie villain, you'd never choose someone like Gottlieb. He wasn't a menacing figure in a dark suit. He was a club-footed chemist with a stutter, a folk dancing enthusiast who lived in a rustic cabin with his wife, raising goats and making his own cheese. He was a Renaissance man who loved poetry and spirituality. He was also the most dangerous man in the CIA. Gottlieb became the chief of the chemical division, the architect of MKUltra, the man they called the Black Sorcerer and Poisoner-in-Chief. His specialty was finding substances that could break the human mind, and his favorite tool was a drug that had recently emerged from Swiss laboratories: lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD. Gottlieb believed LSD was the key to everything. It could shatter a person's sense of reality, make them suggestible, pliable, vulnerable. But before they could weaponize it, they needed to test it. So they started small, dosing each other in the office, slipping it into drinks at CIA Christmas parties, watching colleagues lose their minds and laughing about it later. But office pranks weren't enough. They needed real-world data. They needed to see how ordinary people who had no idea what was happening to them, would react under the influence. And that's when things got truly insane. The CIA established a network of safe houses in San Francisco and New York City. They called it Operation Midnight Climax, and it was exactly as bizarre as it sounds. Here's how it worked. The agency hired sex workers, gave them a salary and protection, and sent them out to bars and clubs to pick up men. These men, thinking they were just having a good time, would return to the apartment with their date. Once inside, they'd be offered a drink, laced with massive doses of LSD. Then the sex workers would keep them occupied while CIA agents watched through two-way mirrors, taking notes, sipping martinis, observing the chaos like it was some twisted reality show. The men stumbled around, hallucinated, sometimes became violent, sometimes catatonic. They had no idea they'd been drugged. No idea they were lab rats in a government experiment. And the CIA didn't care. This wasn't about consent. It wasn't about ethics. It was about data. But Operation Midnight Climax was just one branch of a much darker tree. If you want to understand the true horror of MKUltra, you have to travel north, across the border to Montreal, Canada. There, at the Allen Memorial Institute, a respected psychiatrist named Ewan Cameron was conducting experiments that would make even the CIA uncomfortable. Cameron was a man of prestige, a former president of psychiatric associations, a doctor people trusted. Patients came to him seeking help for depression, anxiety, postpartum stress, ordinary problems that millions of people face. They left as shattered shells of human beings. Cameron believed he could cure mental illness by completely erasing a patient's mind and rebuilding it from scratch. He called it psychic driving. The process was simple in theory, devastating in practice. Patients would be put into drug-induced comas for weeks, sometimes months at a time. While unconscious, they'd be subjected to high-voltage electroshock therapy, doses far beyond what was considered safe, meant to wipe their memories clean. Then, through headphones, they'd be forced to listen to recorded messages, the same phrases repeated hundreds of thousands of times. "You are a good wife. You are a good mother." Over and over and over. The goal was to implant new thoughts, new identities, to rebuild a person from nothing. But it didn't work. Instead, patients woke up unable to recognize their own children. They forgot how to use a toilet, how to eat with utensils, how to speak in complete sentences. Some never recovered. These were people who checked into a hospital for help and emerged as something less than human. And the CIA funded every horrifying moment of it. By the early 1970s, MKUltra had sprawled into 149 subprojects, involving at least 80 institutions, including universities, hospitals, prisons, and pharmaceutical companies. Thousands of people had been experimented on, most without their knowledge, many without their consent. And then the walls began to close in. Not because of conscience, but because of scandal. Watergate consumed Washington. The Church Committee began investigating CIA abuses. Richard Helms, the CIA director, saw what was coming and made a decision. In 1973, he ordered the destruction of all MKUltra records. Burn the files. Erase the evidence. Make it disappear. And it almost worked. Almost. Because in 1977, during a routine request for financial documents, a Freedom of Information Act officer stumbled upon a cache of records that had been misfiled. Boxes of budget papers, receipts, memos that had escaped the purge. The truth began to leak. Congressional hearings followed. Victims came forward. The CIA admitted to the program's existence but claimed it had been shut down, that it was a relic of Cold War paranoia, that nothing like it would ever happen again. But how much do we really know? The majority of the files are gone. The full scope of MKUltra, the complete list of victims, the true extent of the experiments, all of it vanished in Helms's purge. We're left with fragments, glimpses into an abyss we can't fully see. And the legacy didn't end with shredded documents. Ted Kaczynski, the man who would become the Unabomber, participated in brutal psychological experiments at Harvard in the late 1950s, experiments that many believe were connected to MKUltra's research. A young man subjected to intense verbal abuse, his beliefs attacked, his identity dismantled. Years later, he would mail bombs that killed 3 people and injured dozens more. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe just another casualty of a program that treated human beings like test tubes. Frank Olson's family fought for decades to uncover the truth about his death. In 1975, they finally learned he'd been dosed with LSD. President Ford personally apologized. They received a settlement. But in 1994, Olson's body was exhumed, and a forensic pathologist found evidence that contradicted the official story. Blunt force trauma to the head before the fall. Signs of a struggle. The family believes Frank was murdered, silenced because he was planning to quit, to expose what he'd seen. We'll never know for certain. What we do know is this: for 20 years, the United States government conducted experiments that violated every principle of medical ethics, human rights, and basic decency. They broke minds, destroyed families, and ruined lives in pursuit of a weapon that never materialized. Mind control remains science fiction. But the damage was real. The victims were real. And somewhere in the ashes of those burned files are stories we'll never hear, names we'll never know, horrors we can only imagine. MKUltra is officially over. The program ended. The experiments stopped. But the question that should keep us all awake at night is simple: did they really stop, or did they just change the name?